Let me tell you about a day that started with a plan and ended with a revelation. That's the thing about this life on the road, isn't it? You can have your maps, your GPS, your carefully curated list of must-see vistas, but the road itself always has the final say. We were deep in the Scottish Highlands, a landscape so mythic and grand it almost felt like we were driving through a painting. The air that morning was crisp, carrying the scent of damp earth, pine, and something ancient and wild. We'd woken up parked by a stream that chuckled and gossiped its way over smooth stones, its water the color of weak tea from the peat. Coffee's ready, John's voice, warm and familiar, drifted from the small galley kitchen of our van, our home we'd nicknamed the Wanderer. I slid out of our cozy bed, the morning light filtering softly through the blinds. "Best sound in the world," I replied, stretching my arms towards the ceiling. We had a simple routine, a gentle rhythm that had replaced the frantic alarm clock and commute symphony of our old life. Coffee first, always. Then, a slow look at the map, not to dictate, but to suggest. We'd been on the road for nearly 3 years now, ever since we handed the keys of our suburban home to a young family and packed our lives into 70 square feet of rolling steel. People asked us if we were brave or crazy when we decided to do this, just after John's 55th birthday and my 53rd. We didn't feel like either. We just felt ready. Ready for something other than predictable Tuesdays and manicured lawns. Ready for a life measured in experiences, not quarterly reports. That morning, the plan was simple. We were going to drive the legendary Glen Coe Pass, find a trail for a moderate 2-hour hike, and then push on towards a secluded loch we'd heard about from another traveler, a place rumored to have the most spectacular sunsets. It was a perfect plan, full of beauty and just the right amount of exertion. John handed me my favorite mug, the one with a slight chip on the rim from a bumpy road in Tuscany. "Ready to chase some mountains, Karen?" he asked, a familiar sparkle in his eyes. "Always," I said, taking a sip of the strong, hot coffee. "As long as they don't chase us back." He laughed, a sound that filled our tiny home with an easy warmth. We tidied up, secured the cupboards, latched the fridge, and went through the pre-drive checklist that had become second nature. Within half an hour, we were pulling out of our little riverside nook, the gravel crunching under our tires as we turned back onto the narrow A-road. The day was brimming with promise. The highlands unfolded before us like a crumpled piece of velvet, all majestic peaks and sweeping, melancholic glens. Heather, in its late summer purple, painted the hillsides. We drove slowly, not just because the roads were winding and single-track in places, but out of sheer reverence for the view. Every turn revealed a new drama of light and shadow, clouds snagging on the jagged tops of the Munros like wisps of cotton. "Can you believe we live here?" I murmured, my face pressed close to the passenger window. "I mean, not here, but, you know." "I know," John said, his hands steady on the wheel. "Sometimes I still feel like we're playing hooky from our real lives." It was a sentiment we shared often. The feeling that at any moment, the bell would ring and we'd have to go back to our desks, our meetings, our responsibilities. But the bell never rang. There was only the hum of the engine, the beauty of the world scrolling past our windows, and the quiet companionship that had deepened and settled between us in this small, shared space. We were about an hour into our drive, deep in the heart of the glen with no sign of civilization for miles in either direction, when the Wanderer began to sing a new song. It wasn't one of its usual happy hums or contented groans. This was a high-pitched, metallic whine that started faintly, almost imperceptibly, and then grew with a worrying persistence. John and I exchanged a look. It was the look every vanlifer knows, a silent conversation that says, "Did you hear that? Please tell me you didn't hear that. What do you think that is?" I asked, turning down the radio. John's brow furrowed. He eased his foot off the accelerator, and the whine subsided slightly, but it was still there, a thin, unnerving thread of sound. "I don't know. Doesn't sound good, though. Not good at all." He pulled over at the next available passing place, a small gravel cutout on the edge of a steep drop. He turned off the engine. For a moment, the only sound was the wind whistling past the van and the distant cry of a bird. The silence felt enormous, accusatory. The majestic landscape that had felt so welcoming just moments before now seemed vast and isolating. John got out and lifted the bonnet, his familiar blue jacket a small spot of color against the immense green and gray of the glen. I watched him from my seat, my stomach tightening into a familiar knot of anxiety. In our old life, a car problem was an inconvenience. You called a service, you got a tow, you rented a car. It was a problem solved with a phone call and a credit card. Out here, with no cell service and the nearest town a name on a map 30 miles away, it was something else entirely. It was a test. He poked and prodded for a good 10 minutes, his face a mask of concentration. I finally got out and joined him, wrapping my arms around myself against the surprisingly sharp wind. Anything? Nothing obvious, he sighed, wiping his hands on a rag. It sounds like it could be a bearing. Maybe the alternator. If it's the alternator and it seizes up, he didn't need to finish the sentence. A seized alternator meant a shredded belt, and a shredded belt meant we were going absolutely nowhere. The beautiful day, our perfect plan, had just evaporated. The challenge was no longer which trail to hike, but how to get our home, our entire world, to safety. We were faced with a decision. Do we risk driving, hoping to limp to the next village? Or do we stay put and wait for the kindness of a stranger on this sparsely traveled road? Let's try starting it again, I suggested, my voice more confident than I felt. Let's just listen. He nodded. I got back in the driver's seat and turned the key. The engine turned over, but the whine was immediate, and this time it was accompanied by a slight grinding sound. John slammed the bonnet shut with a frustrated thud that echoed in the quiet glen. Nope. That's it. We're not driving on that, he said, his jaw tight. We'll do more damage. So there we were. Stranded. The initial plan of a beautiful hike had been replaced by the stark reality of our predicament. The sun was climbing higher, but it felt like a shadow had fallen over our day. The sense of freedom that was the very essence of this lifestyle had suddenly morphed into a feeling of being utterly trapped. We stood beside the van for a while, the silence stretching between us. It wasn't an angry silence, but a heavy one, filled with unspoken worries. What if no one comes? What if the repair is thousands of pounds? What if this is the end of this leg of the journey? In these moments, the romance of van life peels away, and you're left with the cold, hard mechanics of it all. Well, I said finally, trying to break the spell. At least the view is nice. John managed a weak smile. That it is. Best place in the world to break down, I suppose. We decided on a course of action. John would get out the big warning triangle and his high-visibility jacket. I would put the kettle on. There's no crisis in Britain that can't be improved by a cup of tea. It's a small act of defiant domesticity, a way of saying, we may be stranded, but we are not defeated. As I measured out the tea leaves, I looked around our small space. The photos of our kids taped to the cupboard, the worn copy of my favorite book tucked into a shelf, the little woven blanket we'd bought at a market in Spain. This wasn't just a vehicle, it was our sanctuary. And it was broken. For the next hour, we existed in a strange limbo. We sat in the van, drinking our tea, and watched the empty road. A handful of cars passed, their drivers giving us a cursory glance or a sympathetic nod before speeding on their way. We didn't blame them. What could they do? We were a big, heavy van. John, ever the pragmatist, got out his tools. I'm just going to have another look, he announced. Can't hurt. I knew this was less about fixing the problem and more about fighting the feeling of helplessness. I watched as he lay on a piece of cardboard and slid himself under the engine, his grunts of effort mixing with the sigh of the wind. I felt a surge of affection for him, for his refusal to simply surrender to the situation. In our old life, he would have been on the phone, delegating the problem. Here, he was the first line of defense. My role in these situations was different. I was the logistician, the researcher, the keeper of the calm. With no internet, my usual tools were useless. So, I did the only thing I could. I pulled out our detailed paper map, the one we used as a backup. I studied the thin red lines, the tiny names of villages that seemed impossibly far away. I was trying to impose order on chaos, to find a solution on a piece of paper. It was during this quiet, anxious period that I began to think about the nature of this journey we were on. It wasn't just about seeing new places. It was about meeting new versions of ourselves. Who was I in this moment? I wasn't Karen the project manager, the scheduler of dentists and parent-teacher conferences. I was Karen the navigator, the co-pilot of a broken-down ship, waiting for a rescue that might not come. After another 30 minutes of fruitless tinkering, John slid out from under the van, streaked with grease and shaking his head. It's definitely the alternator bearing. It's shot. I can feel the play in the pulley. We were lucky it didn't just seize and snap the belt. The finality in his voice was chilling. We were well and truly stuck. Just as a fresh wave of despair began to wash over me, we heard a new sound. It wasn't the swift whoosh of a tourist's car. It was a low, guttural rumble, slow and steady. Coming around the bend was a battered, dark green Land Rover that looked as old as the hills themselves. It slowed as it approached, and the driver, a man with a weathered face and a thick gray beard, peered at us from under a tweed flat cap. He pulled up alongside us, his engine idling with a reassuringly agricultural clatter. He rolled down his window. "Bit of bother?" he asked, his accent a thick, musical brogue. His voice was calm, as if seeing a broken-down van in the middle of nowhere was the most normal thing in the world. "You could say that," John replied, walking over. "Alternator's gone, I think." The man nodded slowly, his eyes taking in our van, the open bonnet, the tools laid out on the ground. He didn't offer platitudes or easy sympathy. He just assessed the situation. Happens, he said. He looked up the road, then back the way he'd come. "Where are ye headed?" "Nowhere at the moment," I said, joining them. We were hoping to get to Invergary eventually. "Invergary," he repeated, mulling it over. "There's a good garage there. Young Isla knows her stuff. But it's a fair way," he paused, stroking his beard. "I'm headed to Kinlochleven. That's closer. There's no garage, but there's a pub. And my brother-in-law has a recovery truck. It's a start." Hope, sudden and bright, pierced through the gloom. "That would be amazing," I said, my voice thick with relief. He gave a curt nod. "Right then. Got a tow rope?" Of course, we had a tow rope. John, in his infinite wisdom, had insisted we buy a heavy-duty one before we ever left home. It was one of those purchases I'd rolled my eyes at, another bulky item taking up precious space. Now, it felt like the most valuable thing we owned. The farmer's name was Angus. He didn't say much as he and John efficiently hooked up the rope. He was a man of action, not words. As I climbed back into the driver's seat of the Wanderer to steer, he came to my window. "Just keep it steady now," he instructed. "Keep the rope taut on the downhills, but not too taut. Watch my brake lights. We'll go slow." And so began the most surreal journey of our lives. We were being towed through one of the most magnificent landscapes on earth by a silent farmer in a vintage Land Rover. The engine of our van was dead. There was no music, no hum, just the creak of the suspension and the rumble of Angus's engine ahead of us. It was a slow, careful procession. I had to concentrate with an intensity one hadn't felt in years, my hands gripping the wheel, my eyes fixed on the back of that green vehicle. The journey was nerve-wracking. Every corner was a challenge, every incline a worry. But as we settled into the rhythm of it, something shifted. The landscape, which had become a source of anxiety, transformed back into a thing of beauty. Because we were moving so slowly, I could see things I would have missed at normal speed, the way the light caught a waterfall high on the mountain, the intricate patterns of the lichen on the stone walls, a stag watching us from a ridge, proud and still. The climax of our day wasn't reaching a stunning viewpoint or completing a challenging hike. It was rolling, slowly and carefully, into the tiny, slate-roofed village of Kinlochleven, nestled at the end of a long sea loch. Angus towed us right into the car park of the local pub and got out. "Right," he said, as if he'd just dropped off a parcel. "This'll do ye." John and I scrambled out of the van, a wave of profound relief washing over us. We had made it. We were safe. "Angus, I don't know how to thank you," John said, shaking the man's rough hand. "We're so grateful. Please, let us give you something for your fuel, for your time." Angus waved a dismissive hand. No. It's the way of the road. You do the same for me." He looked at our van. "Go in the pub. Ask for Ewan. Tell him Angus sent you. He'll get you sorted with a dram, and I'll go find my brother-in-law." And with that, he unhooked the rope, coiled it with practiced ease, gave us a final nod, and rumbled off down the street, leaving us standing in the pub car park, slightly stunned. The moment he was gone, John and I just looked at each other, and then we started to laugh. It was a giddy, relieved laughter that echoed in the quiet evening air. We were grease-stained, stressed, and our home was crippled, but we were laughing. "Well," I said, wiping a tear of laughter from my eye. "That wasn't on the itinerary." The pub was exactly what you'd hoped for, warm, smelling of wood smoke and beer, with a few locals chatting at the bar. When we mentioned Angus's name to the burly, red-bearded bartender, Ewan, a grin spread across his face. "Ah, the broken-down travelers." Angus called ahead. "Said you were in need of a rescue and a whiskey. Which should come first?" The welcome was so immediate, so genuine, it took us by surprise. Within minutes, we were sitting in a cozy corner with 2 glasses of golden whiskey, the story of our breakdown already becoming a piece of local lore. Before we'd even finished our drinks, a young woman with oil-stained hands and bright, intelligent eyes came over to our table. "You must be the ones with the dead alternator," she said with a smile. "I'm Isla. Not a garage, but I'm the next best thing. Let's have a look, shall we?" It turned out that Isla was the mechanic Angus had mentioned from Invergary. She was visiting her cousin, Ewan the bartender, on her day off. It was a coincidence so perfect it felt like fate. She spent 20 minutes under our van with a torch, confirmed our diagnosis, and then made a few calls. "Right," she announced, wiping her hands. "The part's in Fort William. I can get my cousin to pick it up in the morning. I can fit it for you tomorrow afternoon, right here in the car park. You'll be good as new." The relief was immense. Not just that it could be fixed, but the way it was all happening. There was no bureaucracy, no call centers, no waiting for days on end. There was just a community of people helping because that's what you do. "You're stuck with us for the night," then, Ewan boomed from behind the bar. "Park up by the loch side over there. No one will bother you. And dinner's on the house. Welcome to Kinlochleven." So that's what we did. We slowly moved the wanderer to a spot with a breathtaking view of the loch, mountains rising steeply on either side. The day that had gone so wrong had somehow led us to this perfect place. We ate a hearty meal of fish and chips in the pub, sharing stories with Ewan and Isla and a couple of local fishermen. We felt less like stranded tourists and more like temporary residents. Later that evening, we sat in our van, the doors open to the cool night air. The sky was a riot of stars, more than we'd ever seen from our suburban backyard. The water of the loch lapped gently against the shore. The crisis was over. The plan for the following day was set. And in the quiet aftermath, the real thinking began. "You know," I said softly, holding a warm mug of tea in my hands. "Back home, a day like this would have wrecked me. John looked over at me, his face illuminated by the soft glow of our van's reading light. What do you mean? I mean, a breakdown. The uncertainty. The complete loss of control. I paused, trying to find the right words. My entire life, our entire life, was built around preventing days like today. We had insurance for everything, contingency plans, schedules, routines. It was all designed to create a bubble of predictability. He nodded slowly, understanding. And when something went wrong, it was a major drama. A failure of the system. Exactly. I said, feeling a sense of clarity crystallize in my mind. A day like this would have been a cascade of stress. Frantic phone calls. Anger. Frustration. I would have been thinking about the ruined plans, the cost, the inconvenience. My blood pressure would have been through the roof. I would have seen it as a sign that we'd made a mistake, that we weren't cut out for this. I took a sip of my tea, the warmth spreading through my chest. But today was different. Yes, there was that initial panic. That knot in my stomach. But then, something else took over. I looked out at the silhouette of the mountains against the starry sky. I realized that I wasn't the same person who would have panicked and fallen apart. Out here, you can't fall apart. There's no one to catch you but each other. So, you just deal with it. You make tea. You get the tools out. You trust that the road will provide. And it did, John murmured. It provided Angus. It provided Angus, I agreed. And Isla, and Ewan, and this incredible place. But it's more than that. This whole experience, it's not teaching me new things about the world as much as it's teaching me new things about myself. This was the core of it, the thought that had been taking shape all afternoon. I thought I knew who I was at 53. I was organized, competent, a good planner. I was also anxious, a bit of a control freak, and terrified of things going wrong. I spent so much energy trying to build a life where nothing could touch us. I turned to face him fully, my voice earnest. But van life isn't about building walls. It's about learning to live without them. And what I'm discovering is that the person I am without those walls is stronger than I thought. Calmer than I thought. More resilient. I didn't know this version of me existed. She was buried under schedules and mortgages and expectations. I see her, John said, his voice soft. I've seen her every day for the last 3 years. I saw her when we got hopelessly lost in Portugal and you just laughed and said we were on an adventure. I saw her when the fridge broke in the middle of a heat wave in France and you figured out how to make a makeshift cooler. This isn't new, Karen. It's just, you. His words were a gift. Maybe, I conceded. But I didn't see her. I didn't know her. I thought my strengths were in organization and control. It turns out, my real strength might be in letting go. In adapting. In facing a broken-down van in the middle of nowhere and saying, well, what's next, instead of, why me? This, I realized, was the true journey of self-discovery. It wasn't about finding yourself on a mountaintop in a moment of zen. It was about finding yourself in the grit and grease of a breakdown. It was about seeing who you become when your carefully laid plans crumble into dust. The freedom of this life isn't just the freedom to go anywhere, it's the freedom to become someone new. Or rather, to become the person you were always meant to be. The breakdown hadn't been a detour from our journey. It was the destination. The unplanned, uncomfortable, inconvenient moments are where the growth happens. The goal isn't to have a seamless, problem-free trip. The goal is to embrace the whole messy, unpredictable, glorious experience. The story isn't in the perfect sunset we were chasing, the story is in the tow rope, the kindness of a stranger, and the shared laughter in the face of disaster. So this is why I think van life is a journey of self-discovery, I concluded, feeling a deep sense of peace settle over me. Because it strips away everything you use to define yourself, your job, your house, your routine, and it forces you to find out what you're really made of. And sometimes, you find out you're made of tougher, more flexible, and more interesting stuff than you ever imagined. John reached out and took my hand, his palm rough and calloused from his work on the van. "We both are," he said. "I never thought I'd be able to diagnose an alternator, let alone be calm about it. In the old days, I would have just been furious at the machine. Today, I was just trying to solve the puzzle." We sat in comfortable silence for a long time after that, just holding hands and looking at the stars. The disaster of the morning had transformed into the gift of the evening. We had been rescued, not just by a kind farmer, but by a shift in our own perspective. We had been given a day of forced stillness, a day to appreciate community, and a day to reflect on how far we'd truly come, not just in miles, but in spirit. Tomorrow, Isla would come and fix our van. We'd pay her for her time and expertise, and thank the whole village for their incredible hospitality. We'd probably stay another day, just to explore the trails around the loch that we now felt a connection to. And then, we'd get back on the road. But we'd be different. Every one of these experiences adds a new layer, a new color to our journey. The wanderer would have a new alternator, and we would have a new story, a new piece of ourselves that we'd uncovered in the heart of the Scottish Highlands. As we finally got ready for bed, closing the doors on the cold night air and cocooning ourselves in the warmth of our little home, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. Not just for the help we received, but for the problem itself. Thank you, broken alternator, for reminding us what this is all about. So, if you're ever wondering if it's too late to change your life, to go on an adventure, to discover who you might be without the comfort of your routine, let me tell you, it's not. The journey isn't always easy. Sometimes you'll break down in the middle of nowhere. But those are often the moments that show you the way. Thanks for joining us for this little breakdown and breakthrough. We'll see you down the road, as we keep living fully, 1 mile, 1 story at a time.